Yo gamers, what's up? It's Gold Demon here, back with another in this video, and today, well, I'm going to be talking about the Prydwen tier list. Now, look, let's be real here. Prydwen's tier list is not it, and it has not been it for a minute. They've been fumbling with their tier list. WUA, Star Rail, whatever. I haven't seen the other games, I'm only talking about the ones I'm familiar with. They've been fumbling the tier list for a minute now. And more specifically, I think it's, at least in my opinion, worse on the Star Rail side. But that's not today's video. Today's video is about the Zenless tier list, right? And I'm also going to talk a bit about Prydwen and their issues, right? And additionally, I do want to do a further video on Prydwen and their issues, but that's not going to be this video. I just figured I would talk about the tier list and how I would place, some of these characters. And, for example, like Miyabi, right? As everybody knows that she's, broken to broken, right? I will talk about some of that myself and where I would place, some of these characters and so on, right? So yeah, hopefully you enjoy all this and have a, good discussion about it in the comments below, because apparently they even gave her own fucking element. Bro, you can just classify it as ice. Look, Prydwen has updated their Zenless tier list, as you can see, right? They now have a just DPS category, a stun category, and support category, because beforehand they had the anomaly characters split up, even though, as they've obviously changed, they were basically all DPS characters. And so for the time being, obviously it's going to be DPS, but we're going to read the updated notes for it, because they have a lot of new character tags that I don't know if they are placed appropriately. So yeah, let's take a look. And I honestly don't even know if the audio is a little too loud, to be real. So I'm going to lower it just a bit, because I see it getting pretty high on the meter. Not too low. About there. That sounds good. All right. Now then, criterion roles. What has exactly been updated here? All characters are assumed to be full-utilized in their best 3-man team. Okay, sure. Played with optimal rotations without mistakes, using their best disc drives main stats. All characters are using the maximum level S rank disc drives. All disc drive stats are considered to be best in slot for these characters. All characters are assessed with good but not perfect substats on disc drives. Out of the 48 total substats possible on fully built characters, disc drives, 20 will eventually be distributed between 10 different substats to each, right? The remaining 28 substats are designed for characters. Best substats with restriction that have 28, no more than 12, be allowed to. Yeah, okay, so point is, they have decided on a way to distribute the stats for each characters on, sheets accordingly with their numbers. Now, this amount of upgraded subsets is actually true. Although I think I might have miscounted on my sheets, to be fair. I think that was like 4 more. If you, well, so you, first off, it's 6 times 4, right? But then also there's all the possible upgrades for all that, and that's what I was accounting for total. So I got like 52 or something. I don't know. Point is, this is all correct. It makes sense. I understand why they're doing this, and this I can agree with, right? We should have a, decent standard of like, hey, let's give everybody this consideration for subs, and so on and so on, right? So yeah, I do agree with that. All S ranks are Mindscape 0, and all A ranks are Mindscape 6, right? It's kind of sad that they took away the toggle for the M6 on the, A ranks. I do think it is necessary, for the main reason being Lucy, and obviously Sakaku being another one. Seth doesn't change that much with his Mindscapes, right? But, well, I guess Nicole does as well. I was going to say she doesn't change much, but all 3 of these supports here have pretty massive impacts for their Mindscapes, right? Lucy is not as usable until she gets her M2, allowing her to get her buff on ult and chain attack, and especially after these ult changes, is going to factor in a lot in terms of her ult uptime, buff uptime. Additionally, the same thing applies for Nicole. Nicole gets a better radius and better duration if you charge the skill with a certain Mindscape. I think it's the Mindscape 2 off the top of my head, right? I could be forgetting, right? I don't have everything memorized already. It's Mindscape 1. Mindscape 2 is the energy recharge one. Close enough, right? And Sakaku does the same thing. She's also getting a buff extension on her, on both of her buffs, right? Her team buff and as well as her attack buff, right? And then she's also getting ice res down on her M4, which is going to be an additional multiplier for all of your damage, right? So these 4 stars do have a pretty significant gap for their actual power and flexibility, when considering these mindscapes. So I think having a mindscape toggle is still, beneficial. But if they don't want to do that, fair enough, right? Still, there is a notable difference, and I also disagree with some of these placements, right? We'll get into that. So yeah, all A ranks are considered as P5. Is that what they're called? The dupes for weapons? P5? I guess that's how they're doing it. P5 A rank, W engines, and P1 of the standard S rank. Yep, makes it. Wait, standard S rank W engines? Okay, sure. The best of these choices assessment, blah, blah, blah. Characters will be considered max possible level, max core skill, maximum rank, maximum weapon level, and abilities level to 11 out of 12. Good, I agree with that. Even if it is becoming easier to level 12 the abilities, I still think that it should be where it's at, right? I think that's definitely good. So yeah. All right, continuing. So they have different roles for each character. Obviously makes sense. DPS roles, obviously they focus on dealing damage. I don't need to read all this. That makes sense. The criteria for it, though, this is what's important. Major influence on rating, character damage output within the best possible team, ability to achieve max rating and show your defense. Sure, fair enough, makes sense. We're going to get a new mode soon, so they're going to have to, I would say, reevaluate some of them and bump a couple characters down, just saying. But yeah, this makes sense. Good criteria. Medium influence on rating, ease and frequency of anomaly application on one or more multiple enemies. I mean, anomaly application for DPS kind of only matters for those anomaly characters. The other DPS, it's not as much. Like, I know Nekomata obviously has her passive where she wants to, and this physical characters in general have their like relic set, right? They've got these abilities to where they want to apply physical anomaly, and then same with Shu Yuan, where she wants to be able to proc corruption with her teams. So yeah, I guess that makes sense. But interestingly, I'm not seeing them list usage rates, which we do know they use usage rates, right? This is like a proven thing. They've talked about this before. But maybe similar to control story was multiple teams to tribes. Modes offer reasonable monster counts, blah, 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 allowing multiple and bias for single target focus. Top tier ratings will affect that. Each character is assessed with only the easiest and most powerful switch cancels. Okay, they're not mentioning it, but I know for Star World they use usage rates, right? But we'll continue. That's a whole nother topic I do want to talk about. That's a big issue with their list. As for stun characters, you guys get the idea. So influence rating, how much days you can do, whether or not the character can apply any buffs or not. Sure, makes sense. Influence rating, how much anomaly or damage the character can accumulate and inflict while outputting the maximum days potential. Okay, yeah, sure, makes sense. Support characters, a major influence rating, how powerful the support effects are. Sure. Medium influence rating, how little or field time the character requires to perform the role. That is fair for the case of Sakaku. Obviously, we all know she takes a little bit more time to do her buff. Specifically, her chain attack is the biggest gripe, I would say, with her. Apart from like swapping off field and animation cancels, that can solve other issues. And then minor influence on rating, how much anomaly the days the damage the character can accumulate and inflict on enemies whilst fulfilling their support role. Yeah, sure. All right, time to go into tags. They have multiple tags. So they have combo. Yeah, makes sense, right? Sure. Yeah, combo, charge. They got many charge attacks. Yep. Minions. That's Lucy. Sub DPS. Yep, sure. Quick swap. To be honest, a lot of the quick swap in this game is sub DPS stuff, if we're being real. But yeah, we all understand, or we should understand the difference between sub DPS, right? It's the character that goes on there to fill up the gaps, and the DPS, right, to quickly do it. What quick swap is where you're swapping back and forth to do DPS on multiple characters, right? Hybrid, obviously, that's stun characters, and then hybrid support, which would be the support variant of that, right? Shock, burn, assault, shatter, disorder. Sure, we don't need to read those. Buff, debuff, and shield. Yep, makes sense. Change log. Miyabi has been added. Amasa has been added. We've combined the two lists together. We've been planning on doing this since the anomaly was blah blah blah, but not how things played out post release. A lot of anomaly characters function as direct damage dealers. With Miyabi, the line's blurred. Sure, she's a crit character. I don't know what they mean. The line's blurred, but she's a fucking. Anyways. In ZZZ, under the current meta, we feel attack anomaly characters directly being paired in terms of performance. The roles are not different enough to keep them separated as a result of chains. Rank has been... Yeah, okay, sure. as always, we're listening to we're reading your feedback. Well, hopefully you watch videos like this for your feedback, because I'll be real, we still got problems with your list, right? Especially because I've been talking with some other, like another content creator about this, and yeah, there's been a really big issue, and this is a bigger thing, right? I don't know if I'm gonna make a video on it. I might, but there's a big issue right now with content, like the content guides for these characters, right? Like the two most recent characters have had big issues with the actual guides that are being put out, right? Like actual misinformation is being put out on some of them, which is insane. But all I'm asking of you guys is to basically not use users rates at all. Terrible system. And also accurately back up everything you have on here, right? Ideally, it'd be in depth, but just have a way to prove and justify your ratings, right? Because having stuff missing is very unhelpful for building up everybody's information about how the game actually functions, right? Things need to be contextualized appropriately so that people can actually understand how it functions within the game, right? This goes for the other list. I'm just saying it's like we want to minimize we want to minimize these mistakes of like all the misinformation and like bad things happening within the guides, right? And that should be reflected in the Prydwen 1 tier list, especially when they consider themselves an authority on this topic, right? Or at least that's the way they display themselves, right? And so I just want to... Sorry, I didn't notice it was a Zenless song. I just want to make sure that's clear, right? I'm like, wait, this is a Zenless song? It must have been one I wasn't paying attention to. But yeah, so we've added meta lines that are already present in our other tier list to split them into 3 groups, roughly showcasing roughly how they are currently in the meta. You know, yeah, we understand that. We've had a new tag, quick swap, sure, and then we've changed the color of anomaly related tags like shock to make them stand out, sure. Yeah, okay, so that's all the changes that we've gone through. Now to talk about the actual list, I'm gonna be fucking real with you guys for a second. Why the fuck is everybody in tier 1.5, especially Bernice, and not an entire tier below Miyabi? Listen, Miyabi needs to be gapping these characters by like a whole fucking tier or more, to be honest with you. If you want to argue the absolute peak on some of these characters and not how like certain characters can get a little bit more of a high-end build, like how Miyabi, you can actually switch her to a different relic set and actually get even more DPS if you just get good subs, but you are limiting subs in this case, so it makes sense, right? Or like what is it? I'm trying to think. Certain enemy matchups for like Yanagi, how she can just get way more burst damage out than a lot of other characters based on like anomaly application, right? And if there's any like external sources of like decibel gain, which to be fair, they're, I believe, not, I don't know, I don't think buffs have a factor of this, but I'm saying is that some characters in certain specific scenarios and setups can get a bigger performance than it might seem initially, kind of like how people be clearing sheer defense in 40 seconds with Billy, right? The reason why is because you were able to, at least in the old system, I don't know about now, I need to look more into this, at least in the old system, group and then quickly build up with Anomaly and Disorder procs on like Caesar, and then get both of Billy's chain attacks in for his max buff, and then nuke down the boss with, you know, a swap in, right? So you would use the first phase to prep, and then you do your double chain attack, swap back in with Billy, and just nuke the boss with his ultimate. Because outside of that, his damage obviously is more lackluster, right? But yeah, there's a lot of like, you know, special things that, first off, that make me disagree with the tier list because of it'd be optimal play, right? But then also certain scenarios where these characters do perform a lot better than they may otherwise, right? And so with that aside, I do believe Miyabi does gap everybody. She should either like you could say it's a hot take. I think there should be maybe a gap in between her and like everybody else. But at the very least, I don't agree with everybody in tier 0.5, right? Now, here's the thing, right? Miyabi's #1 DPS without question. They gave her everything you possibly want. Cancels, iframes, parries, highest anomaly damage, highest crit damage. Like I can go on and on, right? Point is, she's clearly at #1. I disagree with the placement of T 0.5, right? And this is more on the long sides of Yanagi and Bernice, right? Now, why do I mention them? At least in my opinion, and I do have all these characters and have used them, right? I don't think I think Bernice is being overrated, right? And I mentioned this previously in like other videos, as well as another time I was covering the tier list. Bernice is good only when you are actively like type advantage with the element, right? And be like, oh, what? That's not true. Here's the thing. The thing is with burn, right? Is so there are. I'm talking over myself. Let me just make this clear. Bernice is really good. However, I think considering her as like the topaz of Anomaly is wrong, right? She functions, in my opinion, more like Black Swan, right? Where you are having her as a primer and you're detonating with somebody else by forcing extra procs of Anomaly. And in this case would be Yanagi, right? And so without having these other, I would say activator, right, Anomaly characters, Bernice is nowhere near as strong as I would say as some of these other like crit characters, for example, or like Jane Doe, right? Now, obviously, we know there's a crit Bernice build that is actually pretty potent, right? Considering that Lighter that now exists, right? And obviously Lucy, who has synergy with basically the whole game at this point, right? Because they keep winning support characters. But with how Bernice actually functions, she needs an enabler, right? That or she is the enabler for a disorder comp, right? She needs another character to really output all of her stuff. She's not like Jane, who's just a hyper carry where you put them on field and they just take all the whatever buffs you can get, boom, damage. It's not like Miyabi to where she functions as literally every role where it's like you put her on field, you have your disorder damage, you have your crit damage, right? Like she just be soloing, right? I don't feel that Bernice in herself is potent enough to be in tier 0.5, right? Because if you take someone like Yanagi, there's that flexibility there. You can run her on mono, you can run her on a disorder team, or you can even run her as like like other like setups, right? That like a triple DPS setup that you've seen people doing with Miyabi, right? You'd be seeing triple DPS Miyabi, Yanagi, and Bernice, right? They're doing it like a triad disorder comp, right? You're seeing a lot of these comps that are enabled because Yanagi is boosting the base disorder damage, making it actually a decent enough team because you can keep, proccing disorders and, Miyabi's unique disorder multiplier, right? Or her unique ice multiplier. And so I can't really see a world where Bernice is affecting all these other teams if she is shackled to really another unit, right? Now, this can be a difference of opinion. It makes sense that people do think she is this high. I just think she's possibly being overrated by the fact that she doesn't feel like she's doing enough at the free-to-play level that they are claiming her to do, right? That's basically the end of that, right? And I don't want to make this like a whole like Bernice focused video. I just don't see why they specifically are putting her up here, right? Because Burn in itself without her multiplier is way weaker than, the other dot anomalies being corruption and shock, right? So maybe there's something I'm missing in like terms of information or whatever it may be, but from my use of her, I don't feel like she's in that tier quite, right? And as for Yanagi, I'm a bit indifferent on her. I think it's the same thing. And now I've thought this for a while, right? With anomaly characters or disorder teams, I felt like, unlike crit teams where it's like, oh, you're either 20% effective because of, res multiplies, right? They're weak by 20%. You're either, hey, you're doing 20% more damage or you're doing 20% less damage. For anomaly characters or specifically disorder teams, I feel like you need to care about both elements more, right? So it's like, hey, if they're weak to both, I'm doing 40% more damage. Or if they're weak to one, but not the other, I'm only doing neutral damage. Or if they're both weak, I'm doing 4% less, right? That's sort of my thought process for these anomalies, right? And so I just feel like, at least for my use, they're not as potent as my other free-to-play options, right? Because, again, I do have all these guys using them at free-to-play level. I would say Yanagi is probably the best build on my account, even better than my Zhu Yuan, right? And definitely better than my Jane, because I tabulated the subs, right? I counted all that and did the math. She doesn't feel like she's outputting nearly as much as my Jane Doe or Zhu Yuan, right? Now, Zhu Yuan, I do think is just aged perfectly. Like, she's fantastic. She outputs, right? And she's got great teams with a variety of setups, right? Like, Zhu Yuan, all the praise, right? I think she's deserving up here. And then my use for Jane's nukes are so high for, her anomaly procs on her hyper carry team, which I find to be her best team. I don't really like Jane on disorder teams. It doesn't feel that good. It outputs at, a similar level, I would say, to like my Zhu Yuan, if not better than most of the other stuff on my account, right? Now, again, I have not used it in the current Shiyu defense, right, that just reset. This is more so from right before the update. I did just use Bernice Yanagi, Shiyu and like Miyabi, so like I used everybody else more recently, right? It's Jane that I'm not too sure on. So like, again, maybe I'm wrong on this whole thing, but I don't think all of those characters are necessarily deserving of 0.5. In my opinion, from what I've used, I do believe that the two that if we do want to put this at 0.5 would be Jane and Jiyuan, right? And then you can argue for your Nagi. I just think Bernice is possibly being overrated, right? So if we're moving down the list, as for Ellen, Harimasa, and Soldier 11. See, the thing is, I'm not going to lie, both of my builds aren't ideal, but I'm pretty sure my Sakaku does more DPS than my Ellen, right? I need to test this and actually do the math, but I don't think that Ellen is... she's not bad, right? Don't get me wrong. I just don't know if she's comparable to these other two. I think she's worse than Asaba. I definitely worse than Jiyuan, right? But I can't really say past that, right? I don't know how Piper performs, to be honest with you. So I'll be honest about that. But specifically in Asaba's case, I do think Asaba is better than they're giving him credit for. I've seen a lot of good numbers, and I will be building him most likely pretty soon, right? But, you know, struggle is free to play. They don't have a lot of resources, right? Asaba is one of the characters that requires way more investment than, like, basically every other character of the game, because he needs all of his skills leveled, basically. Or he at least needs one more than what most characters do, right, for his damage output. So, yeah, it's a bit rough there. But from what I've seen and like, again, the numbers, people are saying he's doing better than G1. I'm seeing people say he's worse or he's on par. So clearly they're comparing him directly with a character that I would say is already good, right? So if that's the case, I don't see why he's down there with Ellen, especially with, again, from what I've seen and used, Ellen isn't performing that crazy in comparison to these other top tiers, right? She's still a really good DPS, don't get me wrong, but she's just not performing at the level of some of these other DPS characters. So their placements, I think, are a bit weird, personally, right? And if you've been paying attention to the video, right, where I would personally put them, I'm gonna have to expand these tiers, you know, for everything, right? So let me just do it myself real quickly. There's a brief pause right there as I was setting this up. So yeah, back to what I was saying. In case I'm not clear on Yanagi, she's very good. I just don't feel like she's outputting at the same level as my other teams, right? Having used her, right? But yeah, this is where I would probably put these characters, with Asaba being here. I haven't seen enough about him, to be fair, but personally, that's how I would place these characters, right? About this territory, right? Moving forward, as for Piper and Assault, Piper is so clearly gapped by Jane, and I can agree with the rating. She's not a bad DPS, don't get me wrong. But from what I've seen and used, there's a very big difference between the two, and I would put it, let's say, around this, right? I've seen Piper do really good damage, right? And so I guess my comparison is less fair for Soldier 11. I don't really know as much about Soldier 11. I've basically put her to the sidelines in terms of my, you know, building plans, because Evelyn exists now, right? So that's here nor there. As for Nekomata, this is one that I do disagree with. I actually think they're not giving her as much credit. And who knows, maybe this is going to look sacrilegious to some people, but I actually think Nekomata is pretty good. They're just not giving her credit, right? Now, look, to be fair, she doesn't have her, like, ideal setup, right? She really wants to do her quick assist and her dash attacks to actually get all of her abilities off, right? For her actual passive to rock. It's this right here, passive, right? She wants to do a quick assist or a dodge counter, right? So this isn't the most reliable, it's not the most effective, usable passive right now. That will change in the future when we get a quick assist center support. And guess who's about to come out? That's right, Astra Yao, however you say her name. She is a support with a set made for her that's revolving around quick assist. So clearly she's going to be messing with the quick assist mechanic in some way, and she's going to be support. And if you look at the competition of our current supports, who are all, you know, busted for the most part, it's safe to say that she's going to be busted and enable quick assist, which is going to massively boost Nekomata's effectiveness. And Nekomata can already clear really good. I have seen her clear in like 40 seconds in the previous sheer defense. And so if we're going to give credit to Billy, we should be giving credit to Nekomata as well, who can clear in some scenarios, basically doing the same setup as Billy. So of course, if we're going to do that, I will give Billy his flowers and place him similarly at the high end, right? Now, look, some people are going to get mad that I'm like, holy fuck, Ellen Joe standard level? Yes. Some of these limited units are really powerful, if we're being real here. And then also what I said earlier was Sakaku doing more damage. I'll probably do a video comparing all 3 of the ice characters in the future, because again, I got them, might as well, right? Yeah, that's how I'd put there. As for Grace, doesn't really do anything in the first place. I think she's probably being overrated as well. She does good at shock anomaly, but like, as you know, past her initial shock, she's got nothing else in her kit, right? She's just, you know, boosting damage by a slight amount, to where the point is you might as well just run Seth over her for like any of the disorder teams, for the most part, right? Because you get AP and he can apply anomaly if you build him anomaly and reduce their resistances, right? You can get faster build up. So it's like, what is Grace doing to make her like good, you know, quote unquote, right? I don't really see it, right? Oh, and I forgot to look at the tags. Are they accurate, right? So charge, disorder, quick swap, shatter, sure. Burn, charge, sub DPS, sure. Assault, charge, yeah. Combo, disorder, shock, yeah, sure. And then just charge, makes sense. Charge combo, yep, charge combo. I was thinking maybe you want to do like shock in there, because it's just a passive thing. Yeah, no, that makes sense. S11, they probably should add combo to her, because you want to time her attacks for her the best DPS. Now, granted, obviously, especially after the ult changes, you basically shouldn't ever have to like time her attacks, because you're going to be getting yourself more energy from Lucy and, you know, what other characters that the support characters that generate energy, which support characters have a massive buff this update, just saying. So like, maybe you don't include combo with how Soldier 11 teams are now going to play, but again, that's here nor there. I think it needs to be looked into more. That makes sense. And then your sub DPS shock. Yeah, I don't know who's sub DPS in Grace, if we're being real. But yeah, there's Billy, Anton, and Corrin, right? Now, Anton I have seen been pretty good, but I don't, to be honest, don't know enough to properly place him. I'm just going to put him there next to Grace, because I don't think he's that bad. And then as for Corrin, look, even with M6 Lucy, I just don't think Corrin is outputting the damage. Her biggest issue is entirely the fact that she has no AoE, I would say. Billy does have AoE to an extent, but a lot of times you do grouping. And you can see the same thing for Corrin, but like Billy has the damage output, whereas Corrin doesn't quite meet the damage output on any of that, right? And granted, I don't really believe these calculations, right? And while this doesn't look bad, everybody else basically performs better than her, if we're just being real. Legit, that's the main thing for her. It's the performance that everybody else just does better. And she's also kind of slow in that regard, because you have to sit there and just, you know, charge the guy, right? So you really need characters like Caesar to enable her to do her best, right? And I don't, did they even use Caesar for this? What did they use? Wait, what did they use? Corrin damage output, including teams Sakaku plus Vaughn. I mean, she doesn't benefit as much from Vaughn though. Without his res shred, like, look, we can debate what her best team's gonna be, but it's clear they gotta probably relook at some of these characters, for being real, which is a whole nother issue, right? Obviously, there's a lot of people that talk about, you know, them actually updating the list. I know there's some WUA creators that have mentioned how they don't actually update their profiles, and, you know, whatever it may be. Yeah, hopefully they do that. Again, maybe you reach out to community members to help you, you know, update your profiles, or, you know, content creators and so on and so on, right? Whatever it may be. Hopefully they can, you know, make improvements to this actual list, right? As for the stunners, Vaughn definitely deserves this rating. It's mostly because Miyabi's holding him up. Even if we get a new stunner, he's still gonna be viable, because we have multiple ice characters that really make use of his buffs, and you get basically a 50% damage increase just for stopping him on the team and having him hit the enemy pretty much once, right? So yeah, he's very, very potent for this ice teams. And even in non-ice teams, he still has, some use. So makes sense, right? Obviously, Qingyi is like the best stunner in the game because she's going to give you a massive 80, stun multiplier increase. Very, very powerful. And she's got some decent stun. Lighter, I'm a bit more hesitant on. I feel like he doesn't perform at this level they're claiming without his signature weapon because he cannot hit high enough impact. Now, granted, there is a standard weapon option, and that's what they do consider him on for giving him his impact. And, this is obviously going to help him a lot more by giving you extra impact on EX skill, right? So 100%, right? You just got to make sure you skill on rotation to keep your impact. But if I remember correctly, he's still not hitting his max buff with this. I could be wrong. Lighter fans can tell me in the comments, right? But I find it hard to place him here if he's not getting his full buffs without his signature, right? And that's another thing. I do think certain characters like Yanagi, Jane Doe, they really need their signatures to perform at the highest level they possibly can. Otherwise, it's like kind of mid. And you could say the same thing for like Asaba. Miyabi's just built different. But yeah, Lighter, I would put him down to Vaughn because without his signature, his buffs are not as crazy as a lot of people claim. Because you realistically are only getting around 50% damage buff if you don't have a signature because you're only getting 220 impact, right? I did the calculations for it because I was, calculating Miyabi's damage to use him with Lighter because they changed her passive, right? And so like he's still really good. It's just personally, I think that he is T5 because you're only gonna get it was like an effective. I should probably pull that up. Give me 1 second. Right. So I'm gonna just say right now, do not believe these numbers you see on screen. This was just me doing the math, and and like to get roughly the damage increases, and as well as see what the DPS combos are for the characters and so on and so on. And this is supposed to be for Miyabi, right? And she actually does a lot more damage in this in game, and that's because these are using some older numbers, and there's definitely errors with the calculation, right? And I also used different enemy defenses, but point is, this was just to get an example of to see how effective each buffer is and so on and so on. And from my numbers, Lighter is doing around 40% increase from his 50% damage, from his 50 damage percent, right? Because he's making them, he's making you do 50. Fuck, how do I word this? He's giving you damage percent, but it's a debuff. That's what it is, right? And it's going to be around the same damage increase as Lucy with, her buffs, right? And so because of that, and at least in the case of Vaughn, he's doing a lot more in this example because it is an ice character. I think right now, I can't, like, in my opinion, I wouldn't really put him there. However, the argument against what I'm saying is that he increases the stun multiplier, which for a character like Ellen, who has a longer combo, right? Or a character like Miyabi, who wants to charge up, right? That longer stun duration is obviously going to help you a lot in performing your full combo, right? So it makes sense why they put him here. It's just personally because of the damage increase on paper versus, actual application and having a longer stun window in terms of, opening up new combos, right? I'm not really too sure about, right? But yeah, it's here nor there for Lighter. It does make sense why they put him there. I just, I kind of think he's getting glazed a bit too much, right? As for Koleda and Ambi, this is fair. Ambi is a really fast stunner still, so she competes with these characters, but she realistically doesn't do anything for your team in terms of damage. So it makes sense why they put her there. Running a stunner, even on like some I would say like off meta comps, is still highly valuable. So it makes sense why she's still here, even though you could argue that it's lower, right? Because she's not doing anything for your team. But she also does still have really fast stun, right? I don't know. I know in some cases, depending on like elemental advantages, you can stun faster than like Lycan, right? And that's elemental advantage. But for reference, right? And then obviously there's Koleda, who is basically going to be doing the same thing with her fast stun, but she is going to have a chain attack increase, right? And also having a fire stunner for like opening up Soldier 11 teams is going to be very valuable, right? And she does have synergy with Ben, which doesn't really help her in this case, but her fast stun and having the chain attack damage does make her, very valuable in that regard, right? It's more so team options for these characters are limited, kind of like how Soldier 11 basically didn't have a team until Caesar came out, right? Because she couldn't really fully use everybody, right? In terms of buffs, unless you did like, I mean, I guess you could do like and Sakaku, but you want burn to proc. Point is, right? Some of these characters were struggling for a minute, but now they have their full teams, right? And so you can now accurately place how they're going to perform, whatever it may be, right? As for the support characters, yeah, Caesar's number one, without question. I don't think anybody needs to see a tier list to figure that one out, to be honest with you. But yeah, she does so much stuff. She's going to do, multiple things. You're going to get the stun, you're going to get the damage buff, you're going to get the shield, which is invaluable in this harder content, right? Having that shield gate is huge. She will save your life. If there is any characters I would recommend people summoning for, it's Miyabi and like Caesar. Those are like up at the list, right? Again, I'm going to do a whole strategy summon video. I swear to God, bro, I sound like a real content creator saying, go check out this other video I made, blah, 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 right? But seriously, I cannot praise Caesar enough. She is crazy for casuals and even hardcore players. Insanely valuable as a support. But we'll see how that changes with the new support coming out, right? New support might take some of Caesar's, reign away, right? In terms of damage buffing, maybe would it be, right? The biggest thing that is making Caesar so good, I would say, is the 1000 attack, right? She'd still be good without it, but that 1000 attack right there is, it blows her kit up, right? Like crazy. Now there's these other people. I'll be real. I think they're still underrating Sakaku purely because they're quote unquote saying she's too hard to play. She's giving these ice characters like an over 70% buff in terms of damage, right? It's absolutely insane. Now in my guide video, I said 60 to 70. And again, that's because these numbers are a bit skewed, right? But in some cases, she can give these ice characters a stupid high buff, right? That's basically an average of like 70% damage increase that nothing else in the game compares to, right? So why is it that Sakaku is being put at tier 1 when even on non-ice teams, she's still giving those same buffs for those other characters? She's buffing more attack than Lucy, right? Now, granted, combat attack reasons and your guard bores, whatever it may be, they're doing the same thing. The only difference is that she's buffing one character. Now, sure, if you want to make the argument that Lucy's better because she's buffing the team, and therefore it's better for these teams that run multiple DPS, 100%, right? But what Sakaku does for these characters is insane, right? It's literally Caesar. Now, sure, obviously for the off teams that can't get Sakaku's full buff, right? Caesar's a better pick, right? If you do have both of them, because she's going to give you the same things effectively, right? Versus Sakaku, where you get the main power in the ice teams. But right now we're sitting in a meta where ice is the best character in the game, right? Who one of her best, if not her best team, utilizes Sakaku. Like, and we're saying she's worse than Lucy. I don't know about that, bro. Now Nicole is really good. She's gonna give a 40%, defense down, right? Provide you a decent damage increase, and of course, depending on your defenses and whatnot, you'll or what your level is, you can get anywhere from like 20 to like 40 or like even more a damage increase, right? Based on enemy defenses, right? Whatever it may be. As well as her passive and extra synergy with Zhu Yuan, right? Being an ether character, Nicole is insanely invaluable in those scenarios. And obviously with Zhu Yuan, she's giving like an over 50% damage increase, right? Because of, multiplier stacking, right? But if we're doing this character that is harder to use, because to use Nicole optimally in other teams, it's harder to use than Sakaku, I would say. And we're putting her above Sakaku, even though Sakaku in a lot of cases is giving a bigger damage increase. For what reason? Is it because of her synergy with Zhu Yuan? I don't know. I don't really see why these characters are put on a different level than Sakaku when they're kind of the same, right? And again, Lucy needs her her M2 to like really shine and excel, right? Now this could just be me because of how I like to rate things and doing it like overall. Like I'm like, oh yeah, how strong does the unit perform in its entirety? But like, I don't see why their reason for putting Sakaku lower than the other two like could be, right? I don't know why. I know it's probably somewhere in the changelog of them lowering Sakaku. Is it because of Caesar that she got lowered even more? Like Bernice, Yanagi, Lighter, Grace. It's not I mean, I think the reason is because of the prevalence of disorder teams. But look, I'll be real. I don't know if that's enough to knock Sakaku down because she's still providing a very strong buff. Rina, I think, is being overrated now. It was before where I had literally gone out and said she was the worst standard 5 for the pool. And at launch, it was true to some extent, right? People may have hated me for it, but let's be real, every other buffer, even Seth, was providing more for those teams that were being used. Now, though, we have characters that actually make use of her shock multiplier increase, right? Because she's increasing the shock duration, right? Being Yanagi, or in some Bernice teams, or even some Miyabi teams with the dual DPS, right? So now Rina is fantastic for those teams because she's giving, double multiplier increases for Yanagi teams, right? And so on, right? Whatever those teams may be. However, I think a lot of it's hinged on her M1. She does not perform the same with and without her M1. The extra time you get on that makes the rotation much more flexible, and it actually makes your buff do something. Because alone, for 29.6% pin buff, yes, I know you're going to be like, wait, it's not 30. She can't get 30 without the M1. It's really weird. But what I'm saying with this is that her actual buff isn't as strong. And so on teams where you aren't running these, like on teams that don't utilize shock, she does not perform. Like, she just doesn't perform. She's not doing much. Nicole is basically a better option. The only caveat being that Nicole is harder to use because of, energy reasons and stuff like that, right? Now, I will say, this is fair in the case of like Asaba, because Asaba does really love to have the uptime of Rina, and he wants to combo with, EX skills and all that stuff. So it does make sense, right? And here's the thing, Rina, especially after the buffs, now can give other people energy, so this does make her better as a support overall. But I still find it hard to place her there when her only use really is shock teams. Like, it makes sense that her rank's going up from the bottom, right? Because, again, before we weren't utilizing shock. Now we are on a bunch of teams. But I still find it hard to put her here when her actual damage increase is not as potent across multiple teams, right? It doesn't really make much sense when Nicole's doing a better job at that and can do it across multiple teams, right? And, same with the other characters. They're doing a better job of boosting attack. They can do it across multiple teams, right? I feel like possibly their rating is skewed too high for, like the higher end builds where you can like utilize pin and stuff, because pin really only shines once you stack it a lot, right? And that's how defense down realistically works, right? So that's here nor there. But yeah, as for Seth, I think it's totally fair. Seth is what I'm criticizing these other characters for, being hyper niche. Seth excels in being in that hyper carry comp for these anomaly characters, right? Non-anomaly teams, he's not doing anything, right? But in anomaly teams, his buff stacks of everything else because it's giving them the raw multiplier increase from AP. So yeah, it's very powerful, and even right now, AP is still going to be utilized in two of the like strongest comps, right? Being like Inagi and Jane Doe, right? So it does make sense that he is seen as highly, even though he's not giving as strong as buff as his other characters realistically for those other teams, right? Makes sense. And then Ben, I'm gonna be real, in the context of everybody else doing cracked damage, I don't know why you'd use Ben even at M6. Like, sure, he has a shield, but like his buffs are not really good. His daze is mediocre, and as for his actual damage, well, most other characters out damage him. He's not bad, but it makes sense why he's at the bottom of the list, right? And now, obviously, you could argue him as like an off damage dealer for like Coleta teams because you're getting that duo attack, right? And he can also counter. So in some cases, you can make him a stun like sub DPS. But I just don't really see where Ben is performing to warrant him being any higher, right? And so that's basically my thoughts on the entire list, right? I yapped for like an hour here. So yeah, I'm curious what you guys think of this whole thing. Do you agree with the Prydwen tier list, or do you agree with me what I've said this whole time, right? Or whatever it may be, or do you have your other thoughts and opinions, right? That's really what I want to know. That's what these videos should be for, building a shared understanding and not tribalism over which unit's better. Even though math is proving one thing versus practical application, they should both be put together to form a tier list like this, and that's where we get characters like Miyabi who clearly shine above the rest, and you can appropriately put them where they should be, right? But yeah, furthermore, I know I've mentioned it vaguely, Prydwen with their issues of usage rates and like other issues with like AI writers and stuff like that. That's a whole thing that I do want to do for a separate video. But with the usage rates in mind, at least I remember them using it for, what was it? Star Rail's tier list. In terms of this tier list, I don't actually know right now. I'm not going to talk about Star Rail in this video, obviously, but I do disagree with some of these, right? maybe all of them. But I think this is a decent list. While I do agree with many of the placements, I think it's okay, right? Now, would I trust them fully? No, you shouldn't trust one source fully. You want to do your research, look at multiple sources, right? But at least in the context of this video, I think it's okay, right? I disagree with a lot of the stuff on here, and as well as Prydwen as a whole. Yeah, I just really don't think they should be using usage rates. It's a biased reporting statistic for people's favoritism on certain characters, right? Obviously, in the case of Miyabi, she's clearly the strongest, right? But if we go into a scenario where Evelyn is like hella glazed because people just love the character, right? Is she gonna be put next to Miyabi just because they love her character, even if she doesn't output the damage? Hopefully not, right? And that's sort of the thing I want to address. It's like usage rates insert bias into a list, right? I don't think they should ever use usage rates. And if they are still if they're not using it, great. Please list that you don't use usage rates, right? But for the time being, as far as I know, they still use usage rates, and they shouldn't, right? So that's basically that. And I just want to end off with like, subscribe, check me out on Twitch, and yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Look forward to more content, right? And you know, whatever it may be, I'm trying to do better in that regard, right? So yeah, peace.